From the get-go, we see someone covered in bloody bandages with an eye poking out, perfectly setting the tone for the rest of the game. We learn that we're currently deployed in a Pony Express space freighter with a crew of 5. It then writes, "I hope this hurts," which is when the game actually starts. It takes us to 0 days before the crash. The machine instructs us to steer left to avoid any impact with the incoming object. However, we can only steer right. As emergency protocol, the audio pilot becomes engaged, and if we try to interact with any other objects, he'll only say, "There's nothing else to be done, and I can't let anyone in." We obtain the keys from the locker to disengage the audio pilot, purposely leading the crew to death. As we go through the doors, we notice the flyers that belong to Pony Express. Like Polly says, that's the mascot, lend a hand, don't be daft, and rise and shine. I promise you, these will be important later. The further we go, the flyers increase, the ship gets more damaged, and baby cries can be slightly heard as well. Polly jump scares us like Bendy, and then appears one more time like a biblical angel. The screen turns white, 2 months after the crash. So we're going the unchronological way. This is where we are introduced to the crew. Swansea, an old crooked mechanic. Anya, an anxious nurse. Daisuke, a good-hearted kid and Swansea's intern. And Jimmy. Oh boy. We get a brief mention of how Pony Express works. Because they cut down on their workers' pay if something goes wrong, Swansea doesn't want to open the cargo hold. As even his opening line is, the only thing worse than slowly dying is not getting paid. However, as the others think it might be something useful to prolong their survival, they decide to open the lock, which can only be unlocked with a code scanner that was in possession of the previous captain. We make our way downstairs and see Swansea at the utility door, who won't let us inside because it's covered in solid foam, which he's trying to axe down. And since the air seal might be hit during the process, he blocks entry for everyone. We go into the cockpit, which is where we find the code scanner, but before we open it, we make our way to Anya at the medical room. We find the same person in the title screen, who we now know as Curly, the previous captain. Anya asks for Jimmy's help to give Curly his painkillers, which Jimmy belittles Anya by mocking her medical skills. We start seeing Jimmy's desire for control, like correcting Anya when addressing Curly as captain. We feed Curly's medicine to him. Anya rushes off, screaming as she can't bear to listen. Jimmy soon follows her. He mentions that there aren't many painkillers left, and questions why she still wants to keep him alive, which is immediately cut off by Anya saying, "Why do you think he did it?" suggesting that the crew thinks that Curly is the one responsible for the crash. Anya then says, "I have to believe that our worst moments don't make us monsters," which is something that the game goes back to frequently. Before the conversation is cut short, and we go on to open the cargo. 7 days before the crash. Anya calls out to Curly. He apologizes, mentioning that he hadn't been able to sleep, then continues on with the psych eval. She only has one evaluation left, who is Jimmy. However, she isn't that enthusiastic as Jimmy shows how little he cares for any of this by writing, "I have found myself sexually excited at the sight of cartoon horses" on his previous eval. Curly decides to take this up as he has known Jimmy for a long time, and thinks he might get through to him. Anya gives us a note written by Swansea. "They can't expect me to perform miracles." She jokingly says good luck to Curly before we head off. We try talking to Jimmy, however Daisuke has been stuck in the emergency phone while trying to fix the vent. Swansea angrily comments on how every little thing has to go through with Curly, since only he can retrieve the axe. By inspecting the table, we see Swansea actually trying to teach Daisuke as an intern, despite lashing out on him constantly. We quickly free Daisuke and leave the axe with Swansea until everything's been taken care of. Jimmy asks that we come to the cockpit to talk further. We make our way down a long staircase while the music slowly fades away, leaving us only with the sound of our footsteps. We fall into total darkness, then drop into red waters with the vastness of the universe underneath us. As we walk a bit more, loud sirens start to play while emergency signs show up everywhere. Ladders emerge out of the water, however we can't seem to climb them, as we can only go forward. A massive star covers the sky and blinds us. A singular door stands in the distance. And then we finally arrive at the cockpit with Jimmy. After the evaluation, Curly asks him how things are otherwise. Jimmy shares his content with the control he has as co-pilot. before saying how annoying Curly is, with how all he ever hears is how much of a great leader he is, and questions why Curly seems to be on edge these days. Curly explains how despite reaching the top, he feels as if this isn't what he's supposed to do. The fear of not being good at whatever he would have done otherwise makes him not leave his current position, even though this is not the right path for him. Jimmy agrees on this, to which they get a letter from corporate. It can't be read, however, as we return back at the cargo hold upon inspection. An assortment of letters that read out "Take responsibility" can be seen briefly. Then TV turns on shortly after. We can watch multiple channels. The first is an employee instruction video, explaining workers' security and benefits. The second is a black hole swallowing a mass. Third is about the power of atoms. The fourth is meat being hung up. The fifth is consumption of artificial substances to increase work power. The sixth is of a dancing skeleton falling down with the loss of its limbs. And the final one is about mouthwash. Oh my god, they said the thing! The Dragon Breath X mouthwash is a product that kills 99.9% of germs. How neat! 2 months after the crash, it's revealed that this mouthwash is the only thing in the cargoes. Anya comments that the sugar content is so high that it can't be used as disinfectant. Upon hearing this, Swansea yanks one from Anya, finds out that it has 14% ethanol, and chugs it down without a care, breaking his 15 years of sobriety. Jimmy notes that it could kill you in the process, but Swansea laughs at this remark, saying how they can all go down in style now. He offers one to Daisuke, asking if anyone has taught him to drink like a man, while Anya breaks down crying as their fates have been sealed with this discovery. 6 days before the crash, the crew decide to surprise Curly with a birthday party as Pony Express only allows for one communal party per trip. But since only Curly has the code scanner, it's up to us to make our own cake. The crew asks for a speech. Curly becomes anxious before breaking the news to the crew about their layoff after his trip. Jimmy lashes out at Curly, saying that he's only trying to escape from them, so that Jimmy can get back to his struggled life on Earth. It's worth mentioning that it's heavily implied that he was a convict, that Anya never got to medical school, hence why she was freaking out about her financial situation forwards, saying she didn't have any savings. Swansea had become old, not capable of more and more years of employment. Daisuke had his rich parents, so he would be just fine, and that Curly would only climb higher and higher, leaving them behind in the end. A silence fills the room. We cut the cake. And 3 months after the crash, we wake up by Curly's disturbing wailing. Check on him and see that Anya's not there, so we are prompted to find her. We find Anya talking with Swansea, presumably about Curly's situation, and that his medicine is running short. Anya wipes away her tears, telling us that nothing's wrong and that she simply forgot to feed Curly. But before she can take the initiative, Jimmy takes the responsibility upon himself. Come on, stop with the noise. I know what everyone is thinking. The way they look at me. Here we are now, me in the driver's seat. Thanks for that. Blaming Curly for his current position, despite him trying so hard to maintain an exterior of a leader, as he simply isn't mentally ready to become one. He truly is a monster at this point, even going as far as hurting someone who is completely immobile and mute. We enter into a delusion. Curly waits for us to sit down at the table with cake. He suggests having some, but Jimmy rejects, saying that it's mediocre at best. Curly explains how the mediocre stuff makes the good stuff, well, good. That we should all appreciate the little alright moments in life, so that we can carry on and try our best going forward. Or as Curly puts it, all I can do is try to make my life one that I'm not trying to run away from all the time. We find the axe in the cockpit, stuck and bloodied on the captain's seat while Curly's eyes look down on us. I believe this could be interpreted as Curly's current feelings towards Jimmy. However, as we quickly learn, this is not intended for the cake. 4 months after the crash, we're back at the cargo hold with the mouthwash. Daisuke is lying on the floor after Swansea made him drink profusely. He explains how he never really knew what he wanted to be, as he was never good at anything he did. This is where he breaks his initial happy-go-lucky character, saying, "I hope she doesn't blame herself," before asking us to take the mouthwash away. We go to the lounge to find Anya sitting at the table. She calms down thinking about drinking the mouthwash, but choosing not to since it won't fix anything. She mentions about the storage locker in the hallway that had extra medicine which was blocked off by foam. We talk with Swansea to obtain the axe, who is just dancing drunkenly, almost in a manic state. He strikes the monitor down while commenting on how Jimmy is failing as a supposed captain, letting us take the axe as he no longer cares. Anya boosts Jimmy's spirits to ask him to give Curly's medicine again, saying how nauseating it makes her feel. He berates Anya, as he also loses control over himself, scolding Anya how it's always his job to find this and find that, do this and that, and so forth. He goes on to Curly to explain how he's finally starting to understand the pressure of being captain, and that Curly had tried to tell him beforehand. Our worst moments don't make us monsters, huh? And we'll be talking a bit more on this later. However, I just want to say how manipulative he is, even to himself. He actively chooses to use Anya's words to excuse his wrongdoings. He then finally acknowledges how good of a captain Curly was, and that he would fix everything. We can only hear Curly's cries before the scene ends. 6 hours until judgment. Swansea is violently slamming the door, screaming, "Get out!" Jimmy tries his best to make sure Swansea doesn't get in, but he swings the axe, breaking the door's window. 2 days before the crash, Curly and Anya are in the lounge at nighttime, since they both couldn't sleep. The monitor shows a moonlit sky. She comments on how she enjoys looking at it every once in a while, but if you look closely, it has a dead pixel, ruining the illusion for her, as she is shown to not be able to ignore the small bits and look at the big picture, while Curly is the total opposite, even as to never notice the dead pixel before Anya's mentioning. She then asks why Pony Express had put on locks for the medical room but not in the sleeping quarters, which is another instance of how poorly cared for the employers are in this situation. Curly doesn't question it much, saying how it's for safety. 5 months after the crash, Daisuke panickingly rushes, asking for help because Anya is supposedly stuck at the medical, which turns out to be a lie, but Anya still refuses to open the door. Lastly saying, "I'll take care of it." Jimmy thinks that something might happen to Curly, so he asks Daisuke for any other way to get in, and that being the broken vent in the utility room. Daisuke seems discouraged from trying, as Swansea had highly advised that it was too dangerous, but Jimmy pushes him, so they try talking with Swansea. 8 hours until judgment. Daisuke is seen bloodied, laying on the floor. Jimmy still insists that he can fix everything, which Swansea rightfully condemns him. They try to find disinfectant in the medical. The vent inside is open with a blood trail, suggesting that Daisuke had gotten hurt while trying to reach Anya. We move downstairs where we find Daisuke's grave with a code scanner symbol. And since canonically Daisuke hasn't died, we are entering Jimmy's inner world. We follow a trail of blood. "Take responsibility" is written across the screen, before hearing Polly says, "Be quiet." A blind beast, aimless and restless. You can't run from it. We ultimately reach Polly, grab the mouthwash, and are teleported back to Daisuke. Even in this excruciating moment, he cries, expressing guilt. "I'm sorry, I messed up," which says a lot about him, considering that Jimmy is the one that got him injured. 5 months after the crash, Daisuke is still anxious on whether he should listen to him, but as Jimmy persists that they must act before something worse happens, Daisuke gives in. They ponder on how they can get past Swansea. Jimmy suggests that they use a spiked mocktail to obtain the keys to the utility. Swansea mocks Jimmy's lack of skill, using the word captain like an insult at this point. He then scolds Daisuke as well, saying that he never should have come here, as he is a failure, and that diligence would only result in him becoming older, uglier, and meaner. Before drinking the mocktail and passing out, Daisuke freaks out, caring for Swansea's well-being, but Jimmy reassures that he will be alright. Once we go into the utility, we learn that Swansea had been lying about the wall of foam all this time, and only one cryopod, which can keep a member frozen for 20 years, remains. Daisuke, being the good-natured kid he is, thinks even higher of Swansea, saying that he was the one that got rid of the foam. But Jimmy quickly makes his opinion known, that Swansea had been sneakily planning his escape from the start. Daisuke inspects the vents, which mind you have electric sparks going off inside. Still unsure of all this, Daisuke questions Jimmy whether he's sure it's safe, and that they should just wait for Swansea. Jimmy manipulates him, saying things like how proud Swansea would be of him after he'd accomplished the task at hand. So Daisuke inevitably gives in, which we know will lead to his downfall. 1 day before the crash, the game prompts us to find the gun, which we learned that Anya has hidden away somewhere. Curly tries to comfort Anya, questioning why she had never asked for his help. He repeatedly says that he would have done anything since it's his responsibility. Before Anya confesses her pregnancy, Curly shockingly asks Sue, before he's cut off by her saying, "Captain, I told you." I didn't really understand it, but during the moonlit monitor scene, it addresses this. When Anya says, "Why do you think they put a lock on the medical, but not the sleeping quarters?" I truly have no words for this. Even I didn't question it much at first. It's her way of trying to convey what had happened to her, highly suggesting SA. But since she reminds Curly that they had this conversation before, Curly simply chose to ignore it, trusting that Jimmy would become better at some point, even in this horrible situation. Instead of acknowledging it, he only decides to simply talk it out with Jimmy in an attempt to salvage the big picture and not look at the dead pixels. Or in mouthwash terms, leaving the 0.1% of germs. 6 hours until judgment. Swansea slightly opens up about his real feelings towards Daisuke, how he could have taught Swansea to be better, describing him as a useless ray of sunshine, a failure yet a good kid at heart, only trying his best, before instructing him to close his eyes. Putting a final end to his misery caused by Jimmy's delusions. Jimmy still screams how he could have fixed everything despite not even trying to stop Swansea, before lashing at him, turning a blind eye to his own mistakes, blaming Swansea in the process, about his supposed plan to rescue himself, leaving the rest to die, and telling Anya who knows what. He laughs at this remark, saying instead that Anya had talked to him about other things, suggesting that he also knew about the essay Jimmy committed. Swansea states that he could get into the damned cryopod, not that it mattered anymore. We find Anya, who has unalived herself by overdose. We open the gun case and retrieve it. Curly starts laughing maniacally at us. After reopening the door, Swansea runs at us screaming with an axe. 0 days before the crash. Anya clenches her stomach, distraught at Jimmy's response to a revealed pregnancy. She expresses her desire of not wanting Jimmy on this ship, to which Curly goes on to confront him. On the way, we start hearing baby cries once again. Curly tries to console him, but Jimmy asks what he thinks will happen once they land back, presumably that Anya would press charges against him, bringing Curly down alongside him as Jimmy still persists that it was his responsibility as captain, refusing to recognize his part in all of this, before saying, or this can be remembered as a tragedy. Jimmy from the beginning had their fate written out, to go down as a quote-unquote hero in his mind, freed from any repercussions whatsoever. He uses Curly's own words against him, "I'll take care of it," not realizing what he was implying. The emergency signals go off. Jimmy was the one who initiated the crash. However, this doesn't sit right with Curly as he rushes to the cockpit, embracing the impact of the result. 1 hour before judgment. We carry Curly to the lounge where the crew is waiting, their blood still oozing out from their fresh wounds, also making this a delusion scene. Curly is put onto the table. His heavy gasps, almost like sobbing, gets louder as the crew happily congratulate Jimmy, their beloved captain. We then grab the knife and... He puts Curly's legs on each plate, then addresses him, saying how his lowest was the crew's highest ladder in life, that he never struggled to put food on the table, and that despite his achievements, it just wasn't enough for him, trying to convey his cries of pain as a speech of how life isn't even worth living on Jimmy's level, that he would rather die in this state. Jimmy goes on to say how he forgives him for everything, offering him like a sacrifice at the table, almost to cleanse himself of all sin. We can see the crew's bodies have lost all vitality as they all slump down. Jimmy explains how Curly was the one who taught him to accept days like this, then ending his speech with, "Let's eat, let's survive." We go inside the vent, and briefly catch a glimpse at Daisuke. Then his signature flower can be seen bloodied on the floor. We go further in, and see a note that says no turning back now. If we try to go forward, a red face will appear and teleport us back to where we started, so we need to move backwards to get past it. We then fall down a pit with pulley flyers all over the walls, all altered to have mouthwash and axes. We find a vent on the wall with multiple axes impaled onto. This indicates that Jimmy, having no other choice, went through the vent to escape Swansea at the medical bay when he was chased down by him with an axe. We crawl into it. An axe gets thrown at us, presumably by Swansea. We then see him tied up to a chair, and in front of him is a single gun. Once we pull the trigger, it takes us to a graveyard with a sanctuary for Daisuke. Swansea chases us down, and once we hit him 3 times, we return back, but the rope seems to have disappeared. Before we pull the final trigger, Swansea describes how he used to lead the life of an alcoholic in the gutters. It was after foreseeing his death that made him want to quit drinking and settle down with a wife and kids with a stable job. All the things that make a good man, so to speak. He explains how even though his life before was much uglier and nauseating, it still had what he couldn't achieve with his current life, his only problem being an empty bottle at that time. By taking on more responsibility, stuck in routine and discipline to the core, he was only left unsatisfied. He was the happiest at what society perceived to be his worst. Most importantly, he explains how he can at least see himself for who he truly is, unlike Jimmy, and that his only regret is not being able to help save Daisuke. Jimmy tells him that he will fix all of this again before killing him. The delusion ends and we return back at the utility. As we move forward, Curly's eyes follow us, multiplying the more we try to escape. Only he knows what happened, without a mouth to speak up, unable to move or close his eyes for that matter, making him an observer to the hellspawn that is Jimmy. We move out of Curly's breathing pipe. I don't think there's much symbolizing to this, it feels more like a reference to how fish is made more than anything, but feel free to correct me. We then see Curly stuck to a chair, where we force him to eat his own leg. It's to be noted that in the leg description, it says someday he'll thank me. We return to the TV, which now has Jimmy on it. Curly can be seen being lit on fire, as he tells Jimmy to not worry since once they go back, he will continue acting like the villain in the story, so that Jimmy would end up as the better man. Jimmy falls to the floor, thinking that they both could be saved, weeping profusely while apologizing, though his sincerity is questionable at best. We return back at the vent, where a giant red lump is in front of us. We ultrasound it to reveal horse fetuses, a callback to his joke at Anya in the psych eval. After the third scan, the barking turns into baby cries, which afterwards were chased down by the abomination which is characterized like Polly, forcing him to face his sin, his own unborn blood. We go through many employee cars floating in the air, then interact with Polly, the unborn baby embodied. Polly pities Jimmy, saying how all of this is beyond his paycheck, that he's only misunderstood, giving the words Jimmy gravely wishes to hear. He apologizes, saying that he finally acknowledges his mistakes, but only towards Curly, not to Anya, Daisuke, nor Swansea, all of whose death was directly caused by him as well. He uses Anya's words to justify his actions, but Polly objects. He's completely unapologetic to Anya, so engrossed in his delusions that once he saves Curly, all will be forgiven, and he will die as a hero. It's all so disgusting. We finally bring Curly to the cryopod. We fixed it. I fixed it. He goes off screen, then a single gunshot is heard as Curly begins to be frozen in time.
What an experience! This is gonna haunt me for years! Thank you! On a more serious note, there are a few details that I like to go over that I couldn't quite fit into the gameplay. Polly the mascot can be seen perfectly intact at the lounge before the crash. However, it's later on seen to be destroyed. It's most likely that Anya had slept next to it after the assault, in order to feel a sense of safety, because the mascot plays a sound whenever something or someone is in close proximity of it. But Jimmy being Jimmy voluntarily chose to strike it down. He had the choice to become better multiple times, but still managed to choose the worst possible choices, digging his grave even deeper. Also keep in mind that Jimmy never went into the utility room even when Swansea wasn't present, meaning he respects Swansea and even Daisuke on some level. A complete contrast to his attitude towards Anya. Daisuke's shirt has pink hibiscus flowers, which are even present on his tombstone. In flower language, they mean friendship, as well as symbolizing fleeting beauty because they are short-lived, much like how he was in the story. It's also worth mentioning that despite the community painting Swansea as a good man, in his opening line, we are told that money, or not being docked, is more important than the overall safety of the crew, although I don't think it's malicious. He most likely has this attitude to keep providing for his family back home, so it makes sense to a degree why he would refuse to help Anya, because he probably wouldn't just talk it up with Jimmy unlike Curly. It would escalate quickly, leading to a situation where he would be docked. Although this isn't to say that he's a monster, just that he's human as well. An interesting achievement you could get from the grave is the good ending with a question mark by dying to Swansea 10 times. I believe this is because of Jimmy's desperation to keep Curly alive even in his miserable state, where death might be desired. So Jimmy's death would also result in Curly dying, thus a good ending. Another thing that has caught my attention is that before Curly's amputation, the screen at the medical bay is of clear skies, while when Curly's there, it's of a sunset, slowly descending to nighttime when they will all sleep eternally. Game pieces are often used to describe the situation of the crew. Pink represents Daisuke, green as Jimmy, yellow as Swansea, and blue for Anya. At the start, all their pieces are how it should be, standing up. However, as an event unfolds, such as injury or death, their pieces are knocked down as well. Although Curly doesn't have one, as he isn't an active character in the story for long. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. And remember, keep being responsible.